It's time for the Daily Stand Up Podcast presented by Agile Dad with your host, Lee Henson. Without any further ado, let's get started. It's Friday, and it's time for our Agile Not So Agile episode of the Daily Stand Up Podcast. And today I wanted to talk to you about a thought that has been on my mind this past week. I've been traveling a little more lately, and as I've been traveling, I've been noticing an interesting mix of things happening. Let me explain. I've noticed some people who are frequent travelers, who you can tell are traveling for business or traveling because, well, maybe they're traveling between destinations of college and home, or traveling for work, or whatever the case may be. But there's been a large influx of people traveling for pleasure, which was great to see. This is the first time since the pandemic I've seen airports and planes and other places as full as they are now. But it also begs the question, what are we doing to make those connections as people? Now, one of the things that I focus on when I'm teaching some of my classes and whatnot is the importance of communication, the importance of making certain that we are engaged and that we are actively listening. But yesterday, I had a real aha moment. I was talking with one of my groups, and we were discussing the difference between hearing and understanding. And what I saw was that while everyone in that class was hearing what I had to say and trying hard to understand, that there was still a gap. And I associate that gap very much so with the disconnect that these people had one with another when it came to either interoffice interactions or how they were interacting with their peers or with their families or with others, or how they're interacting, especially with external groups with regard to the group that I was working with. So then I turned around and said, I wanted to observe what was happening on my trips and compare that to what I observed in the office. And what I found when I was on my trips was really interesting. There was still a similar disconnect, but the disconnect was different. What I found was that people were trying harder to be kind on an airplane than some people were trying harder to be kind in an office. And I know that sounds so strange, but one of the things that I often find myself saying is if we can find a way to fill the world with kindness, the world will be a better place. But I'm just seeing this trend of people who are more disconnected or more disconjointed. And I think part of it has to do with some of the isolationism they may have experienced. So I thought it'd be a fun idea to just give you the top three things that I think we can do to be better communicators so that we can really engage and press forward with relationships both at work, at home, etc. So what are some of the top three things we can do to be better communicators? Number one, right at the top of the list, is understand the difference between hearing and understanding. I think that if you dig a little deeper and use those three words, those are my three favorite words, help me understand. Even if you feel like you don't know, or even if you feel like someone else may not be on the right page, or I'll even go as far as to say maybe wrong. Sometimes asking, that's really interesting. Help me understand how this applies this way, or help me understand your thought process so I can better interpret what you're trying to say, or help me understand what direction you're trying to take this, or help me understand what your goal is. Help me understand is such a powerful tool. And I think that it often gets overlooked. I believe that if we use Help Me Understand, not only does it show the person speaking that we're engaged, but it shows them that we have a vested interest in what they have to say. And we're not just trying to shut them down and say no to whatever their thought process, idea, or whatever the case may be is. All right, let's move on to number two. Now that we understand, or help me understand, it's time for us to drop the bias. And I know that sounds so crazy, but sometimes when we go in with cognitive bias, whether it's a preconceived notion or whether we're going in with a certain alignment of thought process, or if we're going in with framing bias or even a self serving bias, what's happening is we're trying to walk a mile in someone else's shoes without taking off our own shoes first. And I think it's just so important for us to not have that bias. If you can come in without the bias and walk a mile in someone else's shoes, it's going to help you really engage and understand where they're coming from so that you can associate and have those aha moments. And then finally, number three, this is the one that's kind of interesting. No idea is a bad idea. Now, Now, let me explain because there are lots of bad ideas out there. What I'm trying to say here is that if we approach life with more of a brainstorming mentality and consider that it's okay to think outside the box and hear through what other people have to say. Sometimes we may gain an understanding of how other people function, how they behave, what they do, and it's going to afford us an opportunity to really say, and expand our own understanding, which means that as we expand our own understanding, we have the ability to grow both as a person and professionally potentially. So, my challenge to you is to stop with the bias, open up and be kind to others, and find ways to really understand and use help me understand to figure out who people are, what they're trying to do. And that goes for both work and at home. I think that if we could make those connections, it would help us really understand value better. It would help us understand people better and would help us be better communicators. That's going to do it for today. I hope you have an amazing weekend. As always, I encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next Monday, do take care.